Hello again, this is Rabbi Dr. Juan Marcos Rajona Gutierrez, and today we're continuing our study on Jewish perspectives on life after death by reviewing some critical passages from Second Enoch. Now, Second Enoch and what is generally referred to as Sefer Hekhalot, or Third Enoch, are renditions or subsequent renditions of the Enoch story that differ significantly from each other, but also from the initial Book of Enoch that most people are familiar with. Now, speculation on the date and of composition of either text varies greatly. Second Enoch was likely written before the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, and Second Enoch is often thought of as a potentially Christian text, while Third Enoch, or Sefer Hekhalot, is undoubtedly a rabbinic text following the pattern of what's referred to as the Hekhalot literature, the mystical ascent literature. Now, there's some debate about when the text was written, and there's basically two views. One is that we basically don't know when it was written, although there seems to be a general idea that some of it was available rather early. And so I wanted to start off by reading to you a section from Francis Anderson, a scholar, who notes the following. He says, in every respect, Second Enoch remains an enigma so long as the date and location remain unknown. No use can be made of it for historical purposes. The present writer is inclined to place the book, or at least its original nucleus, early rather than late, and in a Jewish rather than in a Christian community. But by the very marginal, if not deviant, character of their beliefs, its users could have been Gentile converts to moral monotheism, based on belief in the antediluvian God of the Bible as creator, but not as the God of Abraham or Moses. Now, in addition to that, there are other views that basically argue that Second Enoch forms the bridge between First Enoch and Third Enoch, or Sefer Hekhalot, as far as the development of titles and roles assigned to Enoch are concerned. So the inclusion in Second Enoch of ideas that seem to post-date the Second Temple era has often raised some questions, but there are also passages that seem to imply that the korbanot, the sacrifices, are in play. And as a consequence, many scholars still hold the view that Second Enoch belongs to the late Second Temple period. And whatever the case, that's what I'm going to assume, because, of course, we're interested in some key passages that have to do with perceptions of Jewish afterlife. And so we read here, there's a description here of what is essentially Gan Eden, or paradise of Eden. And you can see the rest of the text, but it says here, in the midst of the trees that of life, in that place where the Lord rests, where he goes up into paradise, and this tree is of ineffable goodness and fragrance, and adorn more than every existing thing. And then it talks about the description of this place is like gold and vermilion, fire-like, and covers all, and it produces from all fruits. And then it says, and paradise is between corruptibility and incorruptibility, and two springs come out which send forth honey and milk, and their springs send forth oil and wine, and they separate into four parts and go round with a quiet course and go down into the paradise of Eden between corruptibility and incorruptibility. And of course, you have some additional information here. And it says in verse 10, and I said, how very sweet is this place? And those men said to me, now let's continue a little bit further down to the next slide. It says, this place, O Enoch, is prepared for the righteous who endure all manner of offense from those that exasperate their souls, who avert their eyes from iniquity and make righteous judgment, and give bread to the hungry, and cover the naked with clothing, and raise up the fallen, and help injured orphans, and who walk through without fault before the face of the Lord, and serve him alone. For them is prepared this place for eternal inheritance. And so that's really the key that we were interested in, that this is the reward for the righteous. And this is a key description, because what we're going to find is a contrast in chapter 10 with what is essentially the opposite. And it says in chapter 10, and those two men led me up to the northern side and showed me that there a very terrible place. And there were all manners of tortures in that place, cruel darkness and unillumined gloom. And there is no light there, but murky fire constantly flaming aloft. And there is a fiery river coming forth and that whole place is everywhere fire, and everywhere there is frost and ice, thirst and shivering, while the bonds are very cruel, and the angels, fearless and merciless, bearing angry weapons, merciless torture. And I said, whoa, whoa, how very terrible is this place? And then it continues in verse 3 to list all the different causes why an individual is placed here. You have everything here: child corruption, you have sodomy, magic making, enchantments, witchcraft, wicked deeds, stealing, lies, etc. It sounds in many ways reflective of a catalog of vices. You can see this if you studied other elements of the Second Temple period. You find this sort of list, almost very similar list in the New Testament as well. And you can find this in other literature of the period. And I think that's one of the reasons that many scholars look at Second Enoch and question whether this has influence from Christian texts. But I think certainly in these passages, you don't see an overt influence because, of course, there's not a reference to Christian perspectives on salvation. This has to do with behavior in a more general sense. But it's clear you have a life eternal in a very beautiful environment for the righteous, and then you have punishment and torture for those who embrace a particular series of actions. And I think that is really the key that we're looking at, since we're looking at the development of the idea of eternal life, at least within this particular group. Now, whether that reflected other groups, of course, is a different story, but what we're interested in is the texts themselves and the images that each one of these communities embraces as reflective of the afterlife.